Alright, so in this video we're going to go over the Mario problem or program that was done in CS50 Introduction to Computer Science course, problem set 1 out of Harvard. So before we attack it here in Python, let's go over and take a look at what we're supposed to do. Alright, so it talks about the little stair step thing that Mario has to climb toward the end of Super Mario Brothers. And we're going to recreate that pyramid, except we're going to do it in Python. And we're going to be using the hash marks for the bricks. So the way the program is going to work is if the user inputs the number 8, it's going to be 8 rows high. And we're going to do it two ways, because the way they used to do it a long time ago was they had 2 bricks at the top and basically an extra brick per row. So we'll do that one first, and then we'll do it the way they have it here. Alright, and of course if you put in a height of 4, it would only be 4 rows high. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to prompt the user for a number. And it's going to be between 1 and 8. So let's go back over to our IDE. And we basically just covered this in a recent video. We're going to put in, it's a while loop of course, but it kind of works like a do while loop. So we're going to prompt the user for a number between 1 and 8. And we're going to keep prompting them until they give us the number that we want. So we'll need a while loop, and we'll set it to while true. And then in here we'll get some input from the user, and in this case I'm going to prompt them for the height and then let them know 1 through 8. And if num, alright, because that's what we're calling this. We could actually call it height if we wanted to, so let's change that. So if height is greater than or equal to 1 and height is less than or equal to 8. We're going to break out of this and go down and do some more code. So let's go ahead and check, make sure that we're breaking out and getting the number that we want. So we're just going to print height. Alright, so what's this going to do? We come in here, we say while true. We get some input from the user. Alright, and we can't control what they're going to input, so we need to check it. So we say if that number is between, okay, so greater than or equal to 1 and less than or equal to 8, then we're going to go ahead and let them continue on with the code. And if not, it's just going to keep looping, telling them height 1 through 8. So let's go ahead and test it. So we'll test it by giving it a 0. And of course it loops again. Test it by giving it a 9. Loops again. Now we'll test it by giving it an 8. And since this should break out of the code, it should print out 8. And it does. Alright, so we have access to that number outside of this loop. So now let's go down here and we need to build a pyramid based on that number, or more precisely a half pyramid. Okay, so you remember if they put in 8, somehow we've got to build this pyramid. So let's start with just putting our hash marks in there. And one thing to keep in mind, this is the first loop. This is the second loop, third loop, fourth loop, fifth loop, sixth loop, seventh loop, and eighth loop. Alright, so it's going to print out, and we're going to do 2 on the first loop, and then 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So the first thing we need to do is create a loop. So I'm going to do a for loop, and I'm just going to use the old go-to for an iterator in other languages, and that's for I in range, and then we have to come up with a number. How long are we going to do this for? So let me go ahead and put my colon at the end. I've got my indent, and I want to start by making sure that I'm printing out 8 rows. So let me go ahead and bring this print up here, and we're just going to print out I. But we still need a range. So the only thing that we really have to work with up here is height. So let me go ahead and put height in there. Alright, so for I in range height, let's print I. So we do this, and of course prompts us for a number. We'll just give it 8. And you can see we get 8 numbers starting with 0 and going through 7. Alright, so we can get rid of that I and leave that in my for loop. And if you notice, if we do this again, if nothing else, we get our carriage returns. Alright, because by putting the print function in there, remember it automatically returns a carriage return or a line feed at the end of each line. So even though we're not printing anything out, we're getting the line feed. So let's go in here and create another loop, because we have to print out hash marks. Alright, so in here, in this loop, for J in range, which we'll come back to this in a second, we're going to print our hash mark. Alright, so we know on the first loop we want it to print twice. So out of the things that we have to work with, like height isn't going to be changing. Height is always going to be 8. I is going to be changing. So I on the first loop is going to be 0. So if I take I and run that, of course that's not going to be correct, but let's see what it gives us. So we'll put in 8, and yeah, we just get a long list of things. But if you look at the pattern, it printed out 1, then 2, then 3, then 4, then 5, then 6, then 7. So we're kind of on the right track. But if you remember in the earlier video, we created another variable to hold that, and then we appended another way of getting it so that it won't do a line feed on each one, is by doing a comma and then end equals and then an empty string. So if I run this again, it should give us a little better look at what we're looking at. And as you can see, we kind of got it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So it didn't print anything on the first one. 1 on the second one, 2, 3, 4, up to 7. Kind of like our numbers went, 0 through 7. So before we go in and figure this out, I just want to make sure that you're good with this print. So basically what we've done is, when you do a print and then you have some text or a string, and then outside that string you do a comma, end equals empty string, that will append your next line so that you don't have to worry about the line feeds. Okay, so in this, I on the first round is equal to 0, so it didn't print out anything. On the second round, it was 1, then 2, so at least we got a pattern here. So I'm going to say if we add 2 to I, so I plus 2, then we should get 2 on our first one, 3, 4 on down. So if we run this again and type in 8, all right, that's looking like what I want. But if you remember going back to the other pyramid, it's going in the wrong direction because ours is going down this way, this one's coming down this way. So what we need to do is add another for loop that puts spaces in there. And of course, these spaces are going to be, start with 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and then 0. All right, so we need to put it inside the I loop and before the J loop. So let me go in here and add another for loop. And I like to keep my stuff in order, so I'm going to call this one J in range. And we'll come back to that range in a minute. Alright, but since I'm calling that one J, I'm going to call this one K. And we already know that this one's working, so now I need to put spaces in there. So we'll take this one, hit Control C, Control V, and of course we'll just put a space there. Leave that end in there because remember, we're doing the spaces and then we're going to add these to the end. So now on the first one, we want 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Now keep in mind we got to have something that is changing, all right? And we need something that's fairly a high number because we need 7 on our first one. So I'm going to go with height because remember that's 8 and it doesn't change. And then we need to add or subtract I or J. I mean, we can do either one, but I'm going to go with I because on the first one, I is 0. So if we go height minus 0, or I should say minus I, that would give us 8 on the first one, 7 on the second one because it'd be 8 minus 1. Alright, so maybe we should go height minus I. Let's go ahead and try it and see what it does here. And it's looking good, but we have an extra space here. So let me go ahead and subtract one more from that. So height minus I minus 1. So on the first loop, that would give us 8 minus 0 minus 1 is 7, which is what we wanted on the first loop. So let's see if that continues on to the rest of the loops. And it does. You see how it got brought over here tighter to the wall? So on the last loop, it's 0 because it would be 8 minus 7 minus 1. So the key to take away here in these for loops is you got to have something that is changing on every loop. And it's got to be something that you can use. Like I can't use K in here because K is in its own loop. Now I could use J in here, but that doesn't make a whole lot of sense because J is once again starting out as 0 and then going to as high as it needs to go based on this. So using I here with height and then an additional number, we're getting what we want. So a lot of it's just figuring out what the algorithm is and the pattern for each loop. But once you get the first one, odds are everything else should fall in hand as long as you're going in the right direction. And here we want to subtract because we want to come down in numbers 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and 0. Alright, so if you made it this far, you've done the less comfortable. Now, if you wanted to do it like they have it in theirs, which is they don't have the extra line here, this last one, theirs basically runs from here down to there. So they don't have 2 at the top, they only have 1. So we could take away this number, or actually, can we? No. We need to leave that number in place. We just change this to a +1, and that should fix it. Let's go ahead and hit the 8, and of course we're down to the way they had it on their website. Alright, so that's the less comfortable. Let me go ahead and change this back to 2. Rerun it. Anytime you make a change, I always recommend rerunning to make sure everything's still working before you continue on. Now, the more difficult one is to add 2 spaces and then have this going the other direction. So basically all we have to do is come down here. We've already got a print there. So let me add another print. So Control C, Control V, and I'm just going to add 2 spaces in there. 1, 2. And then if you remember when we first did it, before we put the spaces in there, this was going the other direction. So I say all we need to do is take this, Control C, bring it down here, pop it in there, and that should give us a pyramid going in the other direction. So we knew that this was working. We've added 2 spaces and then rebuilt the pyramid again without putting spaces in front of it. And if we run this, you get a lot of garbage. And that is because we didn't put end onto this print here. So let's go ahead and try it now. Now try the 8. And as you can see, it builds perfectly. And once again, if you want it down to a single, you just take the 2 and make it a 1. And you get your single. Alright, so that's kind of how you do it with a nested loop. That's what these are called. If you have a loop inside a loop, it's called a nested loop. But in Python, and this is probably going to blow your mind, there's actually a simpler way to do this. So if we just run one print up here, and then we take this and multiply it by spaces. So I'm going to hit Control C. I'm going to add a open and close parentheses and then paste that in there and then multiply that times, so do the times and then do your space, that will give you your spaces. Now, I recommend encompassing that in brackets or parentheses, and then add that to your next one. So I plus 1, Control C, and then once again add parentheses. And then times, this time the hash mark. Of course, close that in parentheses, so and then add that to 2 spaces, and then add that to basically this. Alright, because remember it's the same thing. And I say that that one line will do what these lines here did, and we don't need that extra print line down there. So let's go ahead and get rid of these. So I'm going to hit the delete key. Now I'm going to rerun this as is. Hit my 8, and as you can see, we get the same thing. And of course, to check it with other numbers, if we did a 4, we get a 4 high. And if we did it with a 2, it's 2 high. So let me go back over here. Oh, I'm going to undo the delete there. I'm going to comment this one out. And that's pretty much it for Mario. Now this is the way you would do it in most of your programming languages with nested loops. But in Mario, you can always run this one line and that will work too. So thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.